So first things first, David, how are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, just in my flat in London, getting ready to go to practice for some gigs coming up. So yeah, all good. Yeah.
I wanted to put this question in a little bit later, but maybe it's fun to put it in here because you say you need to go to practice, and at the end of the bio for the band for this year and this Our Planet run, it said now we just have to figure out how to transform all this music to the live stage. And what kind of challenge that could possibly pose. So how are you finding it? How are you adjusting what you've done in the past year to the stage?
Well, obviously there's loads of like collaborations and stuff on the album, so yeah, pretty much impossible to do those at festival stuff. So just picking the tracks that Vinny's singing on, and there's a track on each EP we're going to play live. So there'll be like 4 tracks in the set at least. Yeah, just same as all the albums, just ignore the ones that are impossible to play and focus on the ones that we think we can play, and um, try and pick them apart. And we don't, most of the time we don't record our music live in a studio, so
Mm.
it's just kind of reverse engineering process.
What I find interesting then, let's jump back to the making of this music because that's then a different part of that whole creative process. Now, I don't want to focus on this too much, but during the lockdown, what made your creativity or your output so prolific?
Boredom, just like didn't really know what else to do. um I remember going through sort of bursts of like creative flow and then getting really burnt out and bored of that. And yeah, it was just weird, a really weird time. I've kind of like blocked it all out my mind now and can't, it's hard to remember it. But luckily I just put a little shed in my garden. It's like a garden office, and done it out as a studio just before the lockdowns. So like I was just going out there every day and doing something, and making, I guess, tracks, and just not worrying too much about what they were or what I would do with them. And then when we came round to making a record again and lockdown finished, I was like, well, we've got all this music sat here, so let's put it out, really.
And the way the music turned out, you mentioned the word boredom. So is that kind of where a lot of the experimentation comes from then? And then delving into certain kind of perhaps eras of your past where you listen to certain types of music. How did you come to kind of such an eclectic mix of songs?
I think we're just, we're always really eclectic. It's just in our nature. And like we tried again to not be so eclectic, but it just, oh, it's just impossible. Like 1 minute we're doing like a house beat, and then the next minute it's like a folk ballad. I don't know. It's just the way it goes, and I've tried to stop worrying about it now. But um, yeah, I think like I'd we'd been on tour since about 2009, just literally just touring the world in a circuit for all that all those years, and hadn't really had time to stop and think. And then I was digging up old 4-track tapes that I've been posting on Instagram of like sort of like experimental hip hop
Mm.
stuff I was making at school in the 90s. And that's where it all started for me. And then I was making dancehall and jungle, like drum and bass, and brought all from 95 to 2000, 2010, 7 when I met Vinny. So there was like 10 years of just this mad music I was making. And when lockdown happened and all that, I sort of reverted back to those ideas and picked up where I left off a little bit with all that. So, you know, because I didn't have Vinny or the other band members to feed me songs. So, really, so I just reverted back to that and just had fun with it, really.
And well, you mentioned Vinny, and can you talk a little bit about what that chemistry or that dynamic is between the two of you when it comes to writing songs? And then especially, as you mentioned, this time you kind of you produce also a lot of music without the intent of releasing it with Django Django. So how did you go about that process of kind of finding a way to make it part of the band or to make it fit the band?
Well, that's where the collaborations came in, because like normally if I do a beat that's too like techno-y or hip-hoppy or like they don't know what to do with it usually in the band, because there isn't enough to hook onto in terms of chord changes and stuff. So they just go on a hard drive, and I just call it Dave's dance music or something in the hard drive. But this time I was quite adamant that we pushed forward with it, and just if they couldn't vocal it, then either keep it instrumental or just reach out to people we knew that might be able to vocal it. So that's how the collaboration started, really. So yeah, there was like two sets of like two piles of tracks, ones that Vinny and the band could get on with and add something to, and ones that we needed to just send out to different people, really.
And what was that process like? Because well, you've worked with certain people before that ended up on the album, but also, am I right in saying for Don't Touch That Dial, you just Google Japanese rapper and that's how you kind of found somebody to work with?
Yeah, I do that quite a lot. Just go online and like I go on Instagram and like make a note of people that I've seen that are good rappers or singers, or that with Don't Touch That Dial, obviously, you know, it's quite hard to know a Japanese rapper, but I had a Japanese hip hop album when I was a teenager that my dad brought me back from Tokyo, and I've lost it, but and I can't remember what it is. But I was trying to find that to see if that, you know, any of those guys were still around, or there was a Japanese hip hop scene or something.
Right.
And then I came across Yuko and was like, okay, I'll listen to this, and then it was perfect. So yeah, just these things just fall into your lap, I guess, sometimes.
What are you looking for then in the people that you work with? Is it certain textures in their voice? Is it certain? Well, I assume that, do you collaborate on lyrics, or how does that go?
Sometimes we send them the lyrics,
Okay.
like the Stealing Sheep track, or the this one called Back to Back that we'd already written. So sometimes we write it and sing it, and then it's just not hitting the spot with Vinny's voice. So we send it out, and then other times, like the track with Self Esteem, I just sent her the beat and she did everything else and just wrote on top of it. So it just varies, really. It depends who it is and what they want to do, really.
Let's jump into the kind of conceptual landscape of the album then with Off Planet, because you mentioned that machine which you did with Stealing Sheep, which has kind of this technological feel to it, the kind of what technologies can do. I wrote down, I can be who I want to be, and so can you. Give me something false to lean on. This kind of conceptual approach, where did that come from?
Jim actually wrote that.
Okay.
Wrote that song, and I think it was kind of about technology taking over and people worshipping their phones and their screens and the internet, and it's this kind of false way of living because people have these crazy ideas about what the world is or what it reflects back onto them, and then they see themselves in a skewed, weird way, or it's pretty unhealthy. So I guess like like there was an overall concept about technology and space travel and things like that, and then weirdly, as we like progressed through the album, and then subsequently, like since I've been talking about the album to people, the subject of like artificial intelligence comes up a lot, and just it feels like we're in a weird time where technology is suddenly just moving exponentially again. Like if you think from steam engines to iPhones was sort of really just one generation, 100 years. We did that in one person's lifetime, and then everything plateaued a little bit. But now there's a new industrial revolution. It's the artificial intelligence revolution, and we're gonna see another exponential kind of rise.
You say you've been talking with other people about AI, so I'm not going to ask you too many questions, but one that has arisen in my line of work as well is the thought of obsolescence. A lot of especially creative industries, I do have a sense of worry, like how are people going to perceive what AI is capable of, and what the role of the creator or the person still is. Do you think about those things or no?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like, I guess the genie is out of the bottle now, so we'll just have to.
It's very difficult to predict, but
there's no kind of stopping it now. It's happening. So, I mean, I guess no one thought that AI would come for the creative jobs first. They thought it would come for the really boring jobs, and then actually it's started making films and music and designing record covers and being an illustrator, and it's just like, well, that's that then. We're all obsolete. Well, people are just going to have to get used to it and use it as a tool, to create rather than. I mean, it is kind of frightening how quickly it's risen in only a couple of years. But I'd say humans will be kind of sidelined pretty soon.
But I do think as a species we're quite adaptable, so we'll find a way to kind of make it work for better or worse. But
I think so. I think like humans have been struggling with financial systems, and if you think about all these systems we've tried to put in place throughout history, civilization from Roman Empire to communism or fascism, or like we humans have kind of tried everything, tried all these systems, and capitalism, I guess, is where we are now in the West, and that's sort of failing, and the financial system's failing. But I think that everything's going to change because AI is going to start to kind of tell us, like it's going to start to create its own systems and push them on us. And I don't think people quite understand just how much everything's going to change, from the financial system to the creative sector, filmmaking, hospitals, the way that you go and see a doctor if you're sick, or AI is going to just be in every kind of walk of life, and I don't think people are quite ready for it. But in terms of like the creative stuff, I mean, part of me is like, okay, right, it's gonna start making albums, and then I'm like, I'm kind of intrigued to know, intrigued to hear those albums, you know.
It is very interesting, and as I mentioned, it's very difficult to predict how we're gonna adapt, but it is an interesting frontier, I suppose. So, but
Definitely.
something you mentioned just now, kind of with all these systems we've had in the world, and then is that where that line in Who You Know comes from, where we've watched them losing at their own game for so long? Is that kind of what you meant by the repeating systems kind of failing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that track's about power struggle and how sort of power corrupts, and you know, it corrupts kind of every time. So every time you think that someone comes in power that you think's going to be different or going to change or going to change the system, it's just kind of collapses again, and you lose hope a little bit, and it's almost like we're just locked in this inevitable process that human nature kind of can't let us escape from, which is just this kind of egotistical power games. And I think that we wrote that song, you know, when there was this sort of tension rising again in America and Russia, and that was just like really like a big thing at the time when we wrote that. And I think that's a sort of that's in a lot of our songs, you know. We tend to write about that a lot for some reason. This kind of idea of power and authority and the misuse of it really in government and things like that. It's been lurking away in our songs for a long time, I think.
Is it kind of like a purging thing, like you need to get those thoughts out in a way?
Yeah, definitely. I think anybody who sings or writes about politics, I guess, like when you're writing a song about politics or the state of the world, you know, you don't want to just like preach to the converted or be too obvious. You know, we all know, like, people are quite savvy now. Like, I guess in the internet age, everybody kind of knows the problems. So you don't want to just come in sort of beating people over the head with it, because they're faced with it all day. You know, they go on Instagram and they see, okay, right, of course this is happening, and environmental problems and whatnot. So you don't want to sort of beat people over the head. And I think we try to just be a little bit more like abstract with it or covert with it, or there's a lot of songs that sort of we know what they're about and what they mean, but they're open to interpretation a little bit.
No, that word was in my mind just now as well. Abstract. It's not like you're specifically pointing at things, but just these abstract ideas about power, as you mentioned, power relations and how these negotiate. And the last song I would like to discuss a little bit is Lunar Vibrations, because it's very atmospheric, very kind of cinematic to me. I heard a little bit of perhaps Jean-Michel Jarre in kind of some of the music. What was the approach with that song, and because it's again quite different than some of the other songs, so how does a song like that pop up?
That was me sort of like mucking around with a synth that was on my phone. And I think I was like watching a film or something, but I wasn't paying attention to the film. I was writing this little melody on the synth on my phone, and I remember just going out to the studio and recording it before I forgot it, or before I closed the app or whatever. And Vinny wrote a lead on it, and then Isabel Woodhouse, who was a friend of a friend who I'd she was sort of like in the back of my head to work with, because I knew she had this great voice, and I was just waiting for the right track for her. So yeah, it kind of all came together. I suppose it was a little bit inspired by Portishead. I wanted to get this kind of dark, yeah, as you say, sort of like cinematic synth sound. But yeah, pretty much the whole track was just done on my phone.
Okay.
Just a couple of apps put through like a spring reverb.
But it's another side of technology, right? The fact that we are able to do that these days is quite incredible, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you think about we've got a studio full of analog synths going back to like 1960s stuff. But if you think of the power of an iPhone, it's like compared to that analog synth. So it's sort of no surprise that an iPhone can do everything a recording studio could have done in the 60s. But I love the kind of just freedom and speed at which you can write things on your phone now, even if it's a demo or it ends up being just using the recording. It's like if you get inspiration, you can just sort of like get it done wherever you are, which is great.
Final question. We've kind of alluded to off-planet being about space travel and kind of the expansive universe. What do you hope that people hear in off-planet?
I think just like I think people, I sort of come at things from a production point of view where I want the textures to work, and I always sort of see it as like it's a bit like, I guess, like making food, like making a meal. Like if you go to a brilliant restaurant and everything just sort of works, you get this, you get that, and the textures work, and you're taking on a bit of a journey. Like that's it for me, and I guess that a lot of that goes back to making mixtapes. Like I was obsessed with making mixtapes all my life, from a kid, like a really young kid, up to now. I just love making mixtapes and like putting textures together, putting tracks together, DJing an a cappella over a beat that hadn't been done before, to me it's just about creating those little landscapes and those like little kind of sonic experiences that make your brain tingle a little bit or go, oh, that's interesting. But other than that, I don't know really. It's hard to step away from an album and hear it from fresh ears, or like if I heard it for the first, but I think I have no idea now. So just have to put it out there into the world and let other people decide.
Very quickly, because I find this interesting. When was the last time you listened to one of those early mixtapes that you made?
Yesterday, actually, because I just got like an old beatbox, boombox cassette player, and I started going through cassette tapes from school, and some of them are like 4-track recordings of like hip hop things I made on samplers, and some of them are just mixtapes I made in my bedroom. And they still, I mean, they might be from 1994 or 1996 or whatever, but my brain still works in the same way, so they're still sort of interesting to me.
That's very cool to hear. Dave, may I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Thanks for having me. Cheers. It was great. Thank you.